Good morning. We have quorum present, so I'd like to call the meeting to order and start with the first item, which is election of the chair of the Audit Committee, item AU 1.1. Are there any nominations for chair? Councillor Nunziata?
No. Yeah. I'd like to nominate Councillor Holiday.
Thank you. Councillor Holiday, would you accept that nomination?
I do.
Thank you. Are there any further nominations for chair?
Hopefully it was the same person, Councillor.
So no further nominations. The nominations are closed. Since Councillor Holiday is the only nominee, we can vote. Election of the chair for Councillor Holiday. Thank you. That's carried. We can go on to the second item, election of the vice chair. Any nominations? Councillor Nunziata? Thank you. Councillor Fillion, would you accept that nomination? Yes. Yep. Any further nominations? No. So the election of the vice chair is Councillor Fillion. All those in favor? Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to begin by acknowledging, we acknowledge the land that we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. With that, I'll ask if there are any declarations of interest. Seeing none, we'll go through the agenda. I can skip item AU 1.1, which is the election of chair, and skip item AU 1.2, the election of vice chair, as we've completed those items. AU 1.3, the Audit Committee, roles and responsibilities. Councillor Ford is moving receipt of that report. AU 1.4, 2018 Annual Audit Report demonstrating the value of the Auditor General's Office. There is a presentation for that, so I'll hold that in my name. AU 1.5, the 2018 Annual Report on the Fraud and Waste Hotline. I'll hold that in my name for a presentation. AU 1.6, Auditor General's 2019 Operating Budget. Are there any wishes to hold on that, or? I see. Clerk has reminded me there's a presentation, so I'll hold that in my name. AU 1.7, Auditor General's Office 2019 Work Plan, and I see that there's a combined presentation with the previous item 1.6, so that will be held. AU 1.8, Auditor General's 2018 Status Report on Outstanding Audit Recommendations for City Divisions and Corporate Services and Finance and Treasury Services. Councillor Fillion, you're going to hold that. AU 1.9, Auditor General's 2018 Consolidated Status Report on follow-up of the outstanding audit recommendations. Okay, do we want to go back to 8? Does anyone wish to move that or hold that item? Councillor Nunziata is moving the item. All of those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. So just be clear, AU 1.9 has been held. And I guess that affects folks that are here in the room. AU 1.10, Auditor General's Office Forensic Unit Status Report on Outstanding Recommendations. Does anyone wish to hold that item, or does anyone wish to move that item? Councillor Ford, you're moving that item. All of those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. AU 1.11 or 1.11, results of the 2018 External Quality Control Review. Is anyone wishing to hold that item? If not, may I have someone move that item? Councillor Nunziata is moving AU 1.11, results of the 2018 External Quality Control Review. All of those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. And I'll take 5 seconds to congratulate the auditor on the findings of the external review. As you can see, it was a very brief report because there wasn't a lot of criticism in it. AU 1.12, City of Toronto Audit Plan for the year ending December 31st, 2018. Are there any wishes to hold? Otherwise, may I take a motion to receive the item for information? Councillor Nunziata? All of those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. AU 1.13, financial statements for the year ended December 31st, 2017. Agencies and corporations. This is another receipt. Does anyone wish to hold this item or move the item? Councillor Nunziata is moving AU 1.13. All of those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. And colleagues, I'm going to make note, running through the agenda, I wanted to hold AU 112 for a question. Does anyone oppose reopening that item? I missed the number in the run-through. All those in favor? Thank you. My apologies for that. Thank you. I did have a question about the letter in there. And also make note that this was circulated, which was Appendix B for that item. This particular document wasn't included in the paper version of the agenda that was circulated to councillors, but it was posted online, so we've got it here highlighted for us. So we are going to go right back up to the top. Okay, thank you. AU 1.4, the 2018 annual report demonstrating the value of the Auditor General's office. We have a presentation. Just checking we're all set to go. Thank you and good morning.
Good morning, committee and chair. I would like to welcome Jane Ying, who is an Assistant Auditor General, Nero Machovovich, who is a senior auditor. And historically, I've always, when it comes to demonstrating the value of our office, first of all, we have to do it under our mandate under the City of Toronto Act, so we have to do this presentation. But I always let my staff do it because behind every leader you have amazing people and they do amazing things. And it's important that they know their role, but also to grow our staff in presenting and answering questions. So with that, I'd like to just do a couple introductory slides, and then I'm going to turn it over to Nero and to Jane. So our mandate is under the City of Toronto Act, and it's important that we have stewardship over public funds, but also to determine if there's value for money within city operations. And part of our role, really, we report directly to City Council. We have one master, and that is City Council. And we help City Council by providing a transparent picture of what's really happening on the ground. In relation to, we have a diagram here that really just shows that, where you provide the direction to management, and management carries out their duties to the best of their abilities, and then we provide an independent report back to City Council regarding whether the city management is achieving the objectives in a cost-effective manner, and that's essentially the definition of value for money. We have three key lines of business performance audits that include IT audits, environmental audits, really every program audit. We have a fraud and waste hotline, and we also have an IT strategy that we are rolling out to make sure that we're also auditing the IT portions of the business. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Madame Ying to continue on with the presentation.
Thank you, Auditor General. Our office has been producing our annual reports for many years, and this is our 15th annual report. In 2018, we issued 12 performance audit reports and 1 major investigation report, totaling 185 recommendations that we issued. Our fraud and waste hotline received 643 complaints consisting of about 1,000 allocations. And our dedicated follow-up team, they review 157 audit recommendations. This is a very important part of our function, and it is through our follow-up activity that we identify the cost saving from divisions after they implemented our recommendations. And in 2018, our office also established a CPA peer-approved training program for students who wants to become a chartered professional accountant. And finally, the question we always get asked is who audit the auditors? So we are audited every 3 years by a professional group from the state, and they are seasoned government auditors. They come to our office, and last year we just passed our external quality review with the highest ever rating. And the review is to make sure we adhere to the government auditing standards, and they actually spend quite a few days in our office and reviewing our working paper and talking to staff. So moving on, I just want to show you, this slide just show you in 2018 the different types of audits we conducted and the investigations, and it touched on many different areas of public services. So moving on, our audit recommendations can result in different types of benefits. Some are quantifiable with like improve revenue, increase revenue collection, or reduce operating cost. Some are not quantifiable, but they are equally important. These recommendations result in more effective city operations, better customer service, improved internal controls, and better governance. So I just want to say a few words to explain how we calculate our savings. So our cost savings calculation is conservative and achievable. And the reason we can say that is because we do not include the saving in our calculations until management have implemented our recommendation. At that point, we have a very good idea that we can quantify the savings. So some of them, I'm going to give you some examples of this. So such as some of our saving, also I want to explain the one-time versus the annual saving. Some of our saving is one-time, such as a cost recovery, right, from a vendor. They overbill the city. We identify that, we ask the city to recover that, then it's a one-time amount, right? Some of our saving is annualized. A very simple example is one of our audits identifies some of the water, the accounts, city did not receive the water billing, the money from those accounts. And we asked management to enhance their collection practice, so they will receive the water bill account from these many extra accounts. So they're not going to stop it, collection of the extra water bill account for 1 year. They will, year after year, continue to collect the money from these accounts. So this is what we call annual saving. It would not be correct for us to just count the saving for 1 year to stop it there, because we know management will continue to collect the extra revenue from these accounts. So for the purpose of our benefit, the calculation, we project it, we do it just for 5 years, even though the saving will continue beyond 5 years. So this is only for the purpose of calculating our saving. So we combine the 1 year and annualized savings. And we're going to go back to a little bit about the conservative principle later on in the next slide. So this slide is to show you the 5 year, over the 5 year, the amount of savings that is realized because of management implemented our recommendations. So as you can see, we're on the upward trend. I'm pleased to say that, and particularly since 2016, we're on, and last year we have realized a lot of savings from implementation of our recommendations. And also I want to mention, of the 133 million we realized in 2018, almost 90% of them are from the recently issued audit, from the audits we issued within the last 3 years, between 2016 and 2018. The 130 million we realized include, as I said earlier, one-time and projected 5-year savings that City will realize over the next 5 years. So if you go to our annual report, which is a bit long, but if you go to page 19, you'll find a very detailed table. And this table actually itemizes every single audit with the specific recommendations that management implemented in prior to 2018, and the savings realized in 2018. And we have an abstract in the report to explain how that saving occurred and the management's response to implementation. And an additional feature this year, in that table, see the red circle one, we included an extra column to show you how this saving is reflected in divisional management, divisional's budget report, in the 2009 budget report. We actually give you the page references where they mentioned and acknowledge the benefits of the Auditor General's recommendations. So at this point, I really want to thank the City staff for implementing our recommendations. Often it is not easy, and it takes them extra work, extra coordination to implement that. I also want to specifically thank Financial Planning Division staff and the management and staff for helping us this year to compile the last column of data to link it back to the divisional budget reports. So this slide, I just want to show you as you can see, the 2018, so the total, the pink and the yellow together is 133 million savings. So actually, up till we very close to we finalize the report, we only have about 100 million savings, which is not bad. But like the last 33 million is actually almost like a day or 2 days before we closed the report, we realized that actually one of our audit reports on the water billing with water supply to York region, it was already in the newspaper. So City has signed a finalized contract with water supply to York region. And it's as a result of this new contract, City will realize 33 million additional revenue over the next 5 years. And because it's already signed the deal and City will for sure get the money, we check with City divisional staff to confirm that amount. And that's why last minute, we added back to the annual report, our saving calculation. I just want to emphasize that's what we meant by we don't include the amount in our saving calculation until we know for sure that it's finalized. We can really quantify that amount and it's done. So I just want to move on. So this is how we calculate the return on investment for our office is we use 5 years of our office budget, which is amount to about 26 million, and we compare to the saving that realized from our audit recommendation over the 5 years. So we make sure it is apple-to-apple comparison. So over 5 years, city invests 26 million in our office, and over 5 years, we get about 303 million from the saving amount. So for every dollar invested in our office, the return is about $11.70. And I have to say that this is a 37% increase from last year return. Last year return was $8.50. So at this point, I'm going to turn it to Nero, who is the very hardworking staff behind the scene, actually going through all these detailed reports and every single number and to check that they are, every one of them is accurate with support. So I'm going to turn it to Nero to tell us a few examples of the savings.
Thank you. So as we illustrated in an earlier slide, management's implementation of our audit recommendations resulted in one-time and 5-year savings of approximately $133 million. During the year, we were able to quantify and recognize benefits from 4 audit reports that were issued in 2018 and 10 previously issued audit reports. As was mentioned earlier throughout our presentation, descriptions of the savings achieved from each of these audit reports is included in our annual report. So just to give you a few examples of where these savings came from, our 2018 audit lease administration of city-owned properties identified that leasing revenues were not being maximized and operating costs were not being recovered and billed in accordance with lease agreements. Management has already started to implement our audit recommendations to address market rents and expired leases. This will result in approximately $2.6 million over 5 years in increased leasing revenues as well as reduced costs. In our 2018 audit of the Green Lane landfill contract, we identified that the city could reduce costs by redirecting solid waste to the Green Lane landfill site. Management's immediate action on our audit recommendations allowed them to reduce their 2019 operating budget request by about $970,000 in annual cost reductions. Over 5 years, this translates to about $4.8 million in cost savings to the city. Just to give you a few examples from our previously issued audit reports, as our Assistant Auditor General mentioned earlier, in January 2019, the city successfully renegotiated a new water supply contract with the Region of York, and this increased city revenues, or is expected to increase city revenues by about $33 million over the next 5 years. As well, the TTC has also realized significant savings in their most recent operating budgets. The budgets reflected about $3.7 million in annual savings related to our audit recommendations. These savings came from increased use of blanket orders, better management of cores, as well as efficiencies in the aftermarket warranty program. As a result, cost reductions of approximately $18.5 million can be expected over the next 5 years. The city also realized cost recoveries and loss prevention from investigations by the forensic unit. Our office also issued several audit reports in 2018 where financial benefits were either not determinable at the time the reports were issued or where financial benefits will be realized when the audit recommendations are implemented. These are notable audits that are definitely worthwhile mentioning. For example, protecting the city's tree canopy is an important initiative for the city. Our audit of the Urban Forestry Branch noted that the current bylaw provisions don't encourage compliance with permit requirements intended to protect the city's trees. Implementing our audit recommendations will help urban forestry to strengthen controls over permit issuance, ensure correct calculation of the required permit payments and deposits, ensure adequate actions are taken to address old unclaimed deposits, and finally, improve compliance with permit requirements. The Auditor General's extensive investigation into life safety systems revealed that the city's important civic and critical infrastructure buildings were at risk. This is because it was not possible to confirm whether their life safety systems had been properly inspected and were therefore functioning properly. Since the release of this investigation, the vendor and associated companies were convicted of various fire code-related offenses and were fined upwards of $77,000. Finally, our office also completed an audit of the Collection of Provincial Offences Act fines. Our audit highlighted that various elements of court services collections approach needed improvement, especially since about $577 million in fines were long outstanding as of June 2017. Our audit identified $710,000 in eligible defaulted fines that were added to debtors' property tax rolls. Our future annual reports will recognize any further successful collection efforts that come from effectively implementing our audit recommendations. With that, I will now pass it back to the Auditor General for her concluding remarks.
For the road ahead, we're going to discuss in our next presentation the projects we're going to be undertaking. We're going to be discussing the technology that we've been implementing this year and our need to grow our capacity and how we're doing that. But I'd like to truly take this time to thank management for the implementation, and as they've been really hearing council and implementing a lot of the items that relate to financial matters. And again, I'd like to thank my team for the work that they've done throughout the year.
Thank you. With that, questions of staff. Councillor Nunziata, I have you first.
Yes, so what is you have here one major investigation, and then is that the same as the one extensive investigation? Can you explain that? Which investigation
That
was
would
the extensive investigation?
That would be the fire investigation.
The fire?
Yeah, the fire-related one, yes.
And that's the major one as well?
That's the major one.
Listed in here?
Yes, and I can say that there's other ongoing investigations that have not been finalized yet, so there's more in the works right now.
Okay, and so the savings through all the recommendations and that annual savings, so each of the departments are showing those savings when they bring forward their budget, correct? The actual savings, and that it shows that they've actually saved, and who ensures that that they continue to have those savings onward?
Well, thank you for the question through you, Chair. First of all, the idea to tie it back to the budget was actually your idea, Councillor, and I thank you for that because I think it's a leading practice that other audit offices are probably going to follow. We will monitor to make sure two things. One, if there's costs that are incurred in the implementation. The second is if there are adjustments to the savings after they've been implemented. For example, we estimate $33 million for the water contract. That might go up, that might go down. We will adjust the next year. We don't go and re-audit everything, but if we become aware of anything that has to be adjusted, we do that.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So you're saying that for 2018, we saved $133 million?
That is projected over 5 years, but the 1 year realized in the kitty this year is about $32 million. I'm looking to my team. It's about the 1 year savings this year only.
It's about 36 million.
36 million.
Current year.
For this year?
That's right.
Correct.
Yeah.
Oh, so the $133 million is
including the projected
next 5 years.
5 years. Yeah, that's correct.
Correct.
Because the annualized current saving, and we can't, we just do it once, and then we won't report out those again. Right? Yeah, otherwise, we won't have time to do our audit. Every year we have to, there's a cumulative recommendation we keep going back to.
Yeah.
I might just add, and the example being the York Region agreement, where the agreement's been signed, the volumes have been estimated, we understand what the volumes are coming in. We may do a calculation to adjust that in a future year, but we don't go back and re-audit that agreement.
Okay. Now, and 185 recommendations for 2018. How many recommendations have been adopted?
They all been adopted
All of them adopted, the department?
by City Council.
Yeah, but from the departments, have they implemented? Yeah?
I'll go. Yeah, thank you, and through you, Chair.
Yeah.
Management has accepted the recommendations. Some have been implemented, but we go back 1 year later to determine the level of implementation. There are some who have implemented this year, and we've counted that and made sure that we've verified that they've been implemented. But we usually go back a year later. What we're doing this year is trying to change to a system where we can, as management is implementing, we have an ongoing status of implementation overall all the time. As soon as they implement, we'll verify and we'll have a current status of how many current recommendations are implemented. We're implementing a technology to do that as we speak.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Matt Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Auditor General and your staff. The value of your office is, I think, without question, across the members of council. Would you remind me what you said earlier with respect to the savings that the TTC has been able to found through some changes to their systems, what those changes were, and you mentioned something like 18 million over a series of years. If you could just remind me of those numbers.
So, may I, can I? Yeah, okay. Thank you, for you, Mr. Chair. So actually our office had conducted a number of audits for TTC, and the one that is captured in particularly for this year's saving is the procurement audit we did. So
Sorry, say it again, please.
the city, the TTC procurement audit.
Procurement, okay, thank you.
And from that audit, we identified a lot of saving opportunities. And I think it's over because the data at that time was not available, so we couldn't pin it. And the range is around 8 million to 16 million if they implemented all the recommendations per year. So we have to give a range because we didn't have sufficient data at that time.
So between 8 and 16 million?
To 16 million per
a year. Per year over how many years?
Well, if once they implemented the recommendation, the benefit.
This could be ongoing.
Yes, right. And so these are from making sure they claim warranty from the part, blanket contract to reduce the purchasing price, making sure they recover the core from the parts so that because core has value, right? So so far management has already implemented, making effort to implement our recommendations. So this year they have already implemented about realized. Put it in the budget. They already cut 3.7 million from the budget because of implementing our recommended changes. And they're still working on it. That could be additional saving from future years. But I have to stress that some of these changes, it takes them, they have to make the system changes, lots of organizational change in order to capture all the core, and so it may take them a number of years to fully implement the recommendations.
So once they do, they could find savings of between 8 and 16 million.
According to our estimate, and I think and that was actually validated by the external consultant as well.
Yes. So Jane is correct on the range that we saw. And also, I think there's 3 million, there might have been a couple of million last year that they implemented, and they also engaged an external accounting firm to come in to verify the numbers that we were estimating, because when we make an estimate, we don't count it in our savings, we just estimate so that management can prioritize. And then only when it's realized do we say, okay, we can add it back. And so what they did is they hired an external firm. They come in and they undertook a project to re-verify that this was in fact the opportunity for them. And they verified correctly that that is the opportunity. They've started to implement, but they've not finished yet. And but we're happy where they're going.
Happy with where they're going. May I ask you, in all candor, have you found, with your dealings with the management at the TDC, that they have been readily forthcoming with information that you've requested when you've done your audits?
That's not in all cases. Not in all cases, but rest assured, when I don't get what I need, I absolutely make sure that management is going to provide what I need to make sure the information is provided. I can say the current lead at TTC, Rick Leary, is committed. The former lead, when there was a problem, absolutely provided the information. But there are times when we have to really verify, and we have had problems in the past.
So what tools do you have in your toolbox? Like, let's say in this context, the TDC is not forthcoming with information that you're requesting. What tools do you have in your toolbox to be able to say, no, we really mean it? Yes, you must give it to us.
So I'm not going to disclose the tools from behind the scenes because it's part of my my investigation tools. But I do have the power to ask somebody under a summons, and we can hold public inquiries if we need to. But my biggest tool is the support of counsel. If I'm not getting cooperation, I will bring it to this table to make sure that we do get cooperation. But I'm confident that management will continue to provide the information go forward, but I appreciate the support that you're giving us, because if we ever needed it, we would be here.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Councillor Ford, you're next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and of course, as always, great presentation by the AG's office. So just to start off, in your presentation, you mentioned the audit of the Auditor General's office. I did see that somewhere in these reports, but I can't find it. Has the audit been done, or is it coming up? The audit of the office, right? You said a U.S. firm.
What we call is an external review. It was done in 2018. It was one of the report we submit. So it was conducted in 2018. An external group came in and audited us, and we achieved the highest possible rating to make sure we comply with and adhere to all the auditing standards.
Right, and that report came through the committee.
Yes, that was one of the reports today. Yes.
Alrighty. So I'm moving my questions to page number 8 of the presentation. No, it is not page 8. It's page 9 of the presentation. So from what I have seen in the past, your office and yourself, Auditor General, do an amazing job of showing the quantifiable savings of what we have achieved. I think your office does phenomenal work. And my question is, how do we showcase the non-quantifiable work better?
Well, I think it's, thank you through you, Chair. That's a fantastic suggestion. And I think the focus, and the need and the tightness of the budget we've maybe overbalanced on the financial side, and we'll take that away, and it's really in our hands to make sure that's done. And I can say there's phenomenal leaders within the public service that come every day to do an amazing job, and we have to point out where there's opportunities to do things better. But not only on the financial side, but on the non-financial side of making sure services are better. The canopy is protected. They do a fantastic job on that side also, so I'd like to commend them too.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And then just moving to page 11 of the presentation, we see a relative flat line for 2014, 2015. I don't know what we saw before that, but what do you believe, through you, Mr. Chair, has demonstrated the, I guess, effectiveness of your office and the trend it has been growing in over the last 3 years?
Thank you. Through you, Chair, Council has supported us with a budget increase and a staff increase. And so when you put more staff on a job, you're going to get more return. The return may be financial or non-financial. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that we can't, by doing more, there's a more of a result, but we don't actually select our projects based on the dollar return. We select based on the risks to the city and the opportunity for improvement, and that's what we select on. The natural byproduct is what you see. So investing more is one. Management implementing faster because they know it's a priority, and even the current CFO, who's not here today, has made it a priority to implement recommendations faster. That's important. Budget committee focusing on making sure the recommendations are implemented faster. There's a bit of a light on it, and I think that's why, so it's a combination of things.
Mm-hmm. And then my final question is, in the presentation, it was mentioned that we are very conservative in the numbers we give, and any numbers that you do put in front of the committee or council as savings we have made are proven savings. But I do have a question about forecast. I assume not all of the work your office has done in the last couple of years has come to fruition in these documents as of right now. Is there any forecast you have to the numbers we will be seeing in the next 1 or 2 years?
Thank you, and through you, Chair, we do keep track of what we call potential savings, potential for implementation, but it's hard to, we have a number, but it's hard to say what that's going to be. I mean, today, I think we have an estimate right now, don't we, Assistant Auditor General? We have an estimate, 20 million, 30 million?
So there are a few audits that we know when we're waiting for management to implement our recommendation. We know when they implement it, there will be savings. If I can just give an example, as I can't remember everyone, but the one that, like the urban forestry one, we identified that there's a lot of outstanding deposits sitting in city accounts that if they processed it and they cannot refund that amount rightfully, they try everything, they cannot refund, and that money deposit can go back to the city general account. And we estimate around there's about 8.5 million outstanding account been sitting there for quite a while. So we're just waiting for management to process it, right? So they may take them time to process it because they have to go through the different steps, right? But once they finish that, and then we're anticipating city will have additional money into the general accounts.
Thank you. Councillor Fillion, you're next.
Thank you. First of all, like everyone else, I'd like to applaud the work that's been done here. Fantastic and quantifiable and lots of money saved, all sorts of good things. Just kind of looking forward and how we measure success. This is a very broad question, but if we are truly successful, would we see the savings column start to drop and have a lot more findings that management is being accountable, is being transparent, is being efficient, and kind of is doing what they should be doing before you get there?
Thank you, Councillor, Vice Chair. And through you, Chair, it's not a one-to-one relationship, and we don't go after the money. So it's the outcome is the implementation of the recommendations in a timely manner. It could be, for example, protecting security of an IT system. It wouldn't affect the current numbers, but it might affect a risk and reducing a risk. So it's not a one-to-one relationship. The other thing is, you know, I would say you should have a positive return over and above. I should be able to over and above account for my office costs. But over and above that, there's no real prediction factor. It's just the number of reports we do, there are byproducts. So it's not a one-to-one. Success for me is implementation of recommendations, and the outcome is that there are savings.
So just to kind of redo my question a bit, what I'm assuming that a large part of the problem here, the reason that you're able to go in and find such savings is because of deficiencies in the operations, lack of accountability, lack of transparency, lack of efficiency. And to what extent are we able to measure changes in the culture so that we start seeing those things happening with just that as a result of your work, the organization is shifting so that when you go in, you don't find as many problems because the organization as a whole is becoming, for example, more accountable. How do we measure, you know, is that one way of measuring success? And if so, how do we measure it?
I guess thank you, through you, Chair, it's a great question. And at a personal level, I guess I look at different audits in the same area and see the nature of the recommendations. Are they fundamental or are they more refined? You know, but I can say that the city has moved, for example, in the transportation area. They've just received an award from the Ontario Good Roads Association in relation to how they are evaluating contracts. There are other great success stories, like I consider solid waste a success story. They didn't have a lot of recommendations and they implemented very quickly what they had. So, and revenue services implemented very quickly. But I think the city is getting better in the areas, and I think that's successful. I think it's just, for me, if I keep going back to the same area and finding fundamental issues, then I know that's not being successful. That might be an area for the city manager also to comment on.
And I'll just kind of repeat the question. It's if, you know, and I'll just give an anecdote because I'm not sure I'm making myself clear. Several years ago, we found that the public health inspectors weren't properly inspecting restaurants. And so we beefed up that inspection and we went in and they found all kinds of problems. So there was a big spike in identified problems, but where we measured success was that the number of instances where we were finding mistakes dropped like more than in half. You know, we were hugely successful, and we measured the success by when we went out to inspect, we would find fewer problems. So I'm just kind of applying that thinking to here. So we're seeing a big spike in savings, which is great, but who's doing something about changing the culture of the organization so that we have more accountability, more transparency, all of the things that the absence of creates the conditions where when the Auditor General goes in, she finds all kinds of problems.
So if I can, through the chair, I mean, I think all of us on this committee and those in staff, ideally, if we were able to do our jobs in the way in which I think all of us would want us to, I mean, we would put Beverly out of business. So, I mean, ultimately, that's kind of like what we would like to do. However, we do know over time that there are going to be things that are going to be discovered that are problematic that need to be addressed. I mean, the kind of culture that you're talking about is what we would describe as a high-performance culture where metrics are used on a regular basis to see whether or not we're performing at the level that we ought to be. And those metrics should be driving our actions. So, I mean, you see it actually across Canada right now. There's cities like Calgary, London, and to some extent certainly Toronto that are adopting more of a service-based, performance-driven type culture. And so what at the end of the day is that, you know, where we see through our own metrics and oversight of our own management team we see problems. I mean, we should not have to wait for an auditor to find it. I mean, it should be something that is just a normal part of our practice. But that's something that I know, working with our senior leadership team, our DCMs and others, we need to more formally institute it. In fact, I heard a lot of these types of comments through the budget process, where a lot of your colleagues were commenting about, performance and how do we know we're measuring the right things and reacting in the right way. So, I mean, you're on the right track. There's no question. And the auditor does a great job of looking at things and pointing out where we're successful and where we're not. And obviously, it's our job to fix things when she points them out.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, I think I'm the last one. I get to ask a question now. Actually, I'll ask two. The first will be for the auditor, and the second will be for the city manager. So I table one in the report on page 19. This is the big summary of the savings realized, and the far right column is the one where it fits into the city division. And I applaud this work because this is great. We can see how this translates to the operations. Can you tell me, out of the money, is it substantially matching the total at the bottom where it squares up in the city budget? So in 18-19, or let's take 2020, would we see a reduced amount of $23 million, 189 to the budget, or is it less? Is it sort of notional? Because you match it over to the budget pages, but take the first item, Toronto Court Services. If I added up the items on page 3, 12, 20, and 21 of the budget, would it add up to $710,000?
I'll turn that over. So I'll turn that over to Jane. Yeah.
So these numbers, every one of them has been verified with management staff to be accurate. And then we match it when we try to make sure we reflect it in the budget. So the 710, it should reflect in the budget on those pages. Some of them, because it's not a separate line item, I have to clarify that, because the budget is so large from the divisional, and our saving could be already embedded into certain amount. It's not a separate line item, but management did acknowledge that they realize that much benefit and savings when they are developing their annual budget. And so where you can, we try to match it perfectly, but some of them you don't see a separate line item for that particular one, but you will definitely see acknowledgement of the Auditor General's recommendation and how it benefit the divisions.
So was every dollar of this acknowledged then in the budget?
Yes.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure we clarify. I think for the first year, like for the one time and then for the first year that the budget is there, they would be visible. And if there was a non-program area, it might be difficult to show, but they've referenced it within the budget on the page. But for the successive years, we would have to be going back to add it every single year from all the prior years. So we haven't done that. This is our first year, and we haven't done that. But for the one-time savings and then for the first year, we have included that within the budget. And they've referenced it. But is it dollar for dollar referenced? I think it's some are dollar for dollar, and then there's some that are, they don't belong to a program budget. They belong to, for example, overall revenue to the city. The revenue may increase, but it might not be shown exactly, but they've referenced it within the budget. So every page we've referenced as best we can, but we can maybe continue to refine that.
So my follow-on question, I think, is for the management team, the senior management team of the city. The dollar amounts are staggering, actually. I mean, we squabble over far less at City Council often. How is this baked into the budget? Like, I don't, in the budget summary that I had seen, I don't recall, a particular line that said audit savings of that value. So how is this reflected in the budgets and squared up with council's understanding of what the proposal is going forward? To me, $35 million or $23 million is material in the overall amount that we talk about when we make our budget decisions. And is it this that it's sort of tucked into little pockets everywhere, and the budgets rise because of these values, or are we seeing a true reduction in here? and it's translated to the final budget amount.
Well, just through the chair, I can answer it from a divisional perspective. We would incorporate those line items in the budget where there is, say, increase in revenue, but as Beverly had mentioned, those would be one time. And then in future years, those increases would carry in the budget, so there wouldn't actually be a subsequent increase. It would just be baked into the budget. If there's any cost avoidance items, those wouldn't necessarily show in the budget. We would have to reference those as separate, I guess, qualitative or speaking points, because as you would aware, the budget, it wouldn't be in the budget to begin with. We wouldn't have to increase our budget to account for that. However, those savings would be realized regardless.
Thank you. With that, are there any speakers to this item? Councillor Nunziata, I think I had you down.
Yes, I have a motion. So that that the Audit Committee recommend that City Council acknowledge the importance of timely and forthcoming information from city divisions, agencies, and corporations, including the Toronto Transit Commission, to support the work of the Auditor General and encourage the Auditor General to report to the Audit Committee any instances of delay. I'm moving that because of what I heard, because I think when I was on here previously, Councillor Matlow, with you, the same thing with TTC. There were information, and we were told that there was information not forthcoming. So I'm moving that motion. Just on the point, Councillor Holyday, that you questioned about the budget, that's exactly what I've been bringing forward at every budget meeting, to see to an itemized line item that show the actual savings in the divisions. And it might help, and I don't know if the Auditor General could do that in the future, maybe when the divisions bring forward their budget, a separate line item on $2 million savings and deducting that from their overall budget, so we know that it's an actual budget. Because it's true, we want to see these savings. We're told they're there, but unless you see them actually in their budget and reducing their total, that you know that it's an actual budget. One thing that concerned me is the $8 million sitting in an account for years and no one knowing that the money is there. That's very concerning. That should never happen. Somebody should be there must be somebody that's balancing these accounts. I just find that shocking, actually, that there could be $8 million sitting in an account for years and not being used when we're going through the budget process and we're looking to find every dollar, to balance the budget. And this is happening. So, thank you for that. But, that's an issue that I really have concerns with. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fillion next.
Yes, well, an excellent report. I appreciate Councillor Nunziata's motion and will certainly support it. The broader concern that I have, I'm not sure whether it fits within the mandate of this committee or not, so I'm not going to move a motion today, and probably we'll have some informal conversations to possibly make a motion at council. But my concern is the culture of the organization and the lack of accountability as demonstrated by the ongoing work of the Auditor General and what we find in the findings that come to this committee, and what we continually see examples of is people not doing their jobs. We also, what doesn't get reported here is all the people who do fantastic jobs, and so I want to certainly acknowledge that we have a good share of that. But I'm not sure that our structure or our internal culture supports accountability. And, I could give all kinds of examples, which I won't, but just things I've encountered in the past week that are screw-ups, for lack of a better term. And if you tried to hold somebody accountable, you wouldn't be able to, because, you really can't trace who made the mistake, who was responsible for supervising that person. There's just kind of so much slipping through the cracks that, and there doesn't seem to be kind of consequences for those sorts of things. And so I'm just concerned that at the same time that the Auditor General is doing a great job in quantifying some of the mistakes that we're making and in correcting them and saving us a ton of money and all that, there's also another side of the city government that's looking at what are the conditions that have created these results and what are we going to do to create a situation where the Auditor General doesn't find as many things that are amiss.
Thank you. Councillor Matlow.
Mr. Chair, what I said earlier, I just want to reiterate that I think every member of council, to my knowledge, appreciates the value of the Office of the Auditor General. Both the Auditor General herself, who does provide really strong leadership, along with her staff, who do incredible job. And I've read reports where I know that some of you have been sitting in rooms going through boxes and boxes, lawyers' boxes galore, trying to put things together, almost like forensic investigators. And it really is remarkable, the work that all of you do in providing both cost savings, but sometimes even more importantly, the accountability and recommendations to improve our system, try to make City Hall work better. And it's just invaluable. There actually is no dollar number that you can put on that. That being said, I do share Councillor Fillion's concerns around a culture that we have that doesn't always support arriving at accountability. That there is a culture that can be careerist, can be that rewards putting out fires rather than validating when a fire actually was there. That if there's no problems here, then I advance. But if I actually acknowledge that things broke, then I don't. And that's not unique to Toronto City Hall. I mean, you can find that in many corporations, many other governments, but it exists. And I think we all acknowledge that if we're to be honest. And, that's why it's important that we shine that bright light and hold those to account that we can. But the TTC is one example that I've had experiences with where there's so many good people, so many honest, well-meaning people who work for the TTC. And so in no way do I mean to generally admonish the TTC. But I have had many experiences where I just don't trust the information that's put in front of me as a member of council for a number of reasons. Often it's due to the politics of the debate. One example, with all due respect, I think the Auditor General got it wrong with her investigation into that controversial briefing note that we discussed a year ago. Not because we don't have a good Auditor General, I think she does a great job, but I don't believe that she was provided accurate information that helped her lead her to the correct conclusion. And I still have a lot of questions about the information that was provided that led to a disastrous decision with respect to transit and the potential waste of billions of dollars. More recently, we just received a heads up that a report's coming about TTC fare evasions, where we may not have been provided with accurate information for several years now that led to the discovery by the Auditor General. We're seeing cost savings being demonstrated now, where if they had only done some simple things with respect to the warranties, perhaps they could have saved more money that may have mitigated the need for fare hikes. I don't know if that's true, but these are the questions that should be discussed at the TTC board. So I just want to sort of reiterate again, Councillor Fillion has had his own experiences with other agencies where he's provided, I think, courageous leadership where nobody else was ringing the alarm bells and Councillor Fillion did. Toronto Parking Authority is one. But I say this all just to say that I really respect the value that your office provides. I joked, I was joking earlier where I wrote that, because this has been said to me, that being a member of the Audit Committee, it sounds like I'm going for a root canal. Just the word audit, for a lot of people, it just sounds so boring. And I remind people, this is the most fascinating committee that one could be on. This is actually the reason that this is the one committee that I actually now asked to be on, and the one committee that I actually get that I asked to be on, because this is where we discover both how things work well and also how things don't work well. We discover fascinating stories about both leadership but also unethical behavior. And ultimately, we're able to find every tax dollar that should be going towards the services residents demand and require, and also create a more accountable culture. But I just want to reiterate, we've got a long way to go. And I hope as a member of council and as a resident of Toronto that I can always have full confidence in the information provided. And we need to support our Auditor General to be able to demand that that's forthcoming in every case, including the TTC.
Thank you. Councillor Ford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I don't always agree with everything that Councillor Matlow says, but definitely I think one thing I do is it is a great committee to be on, and the work that the Auditor General does and her team is remarkable. And when I think about that, I would say that there's a lot of thankless jobs within the city bureaucracy. Madam Auditor General, I don't think you have the most thankless job, because every time I've spoken at this committee, it usually starts with thank you for the work that you do and the work your team does. One of my, takeaways from this, and I'll be very brief because the members on the committee have summarized my comments very well and what I want to say, but the one thing I want to focus on is your slide that we talked about in questions is the types of benefits where which we should really focus on the quantifiable benefits that come through this committee and the cost savings we do. But when I also look at the city as a whole and what our residents expect of the individuals sitting around this table, as well as our bureaucracy, is really falls under also the non-quantifiable. And that is more effective operations. The residents of Toronto see that firsthand. We, as councillors, as decision makers, as division heads and city leaders, we see the quantifiable, and that helps us do our jobs. But the residents of Toronto see the non-quantifiable. They see the more effective operations. They see better customer service. They see better governance. So I think if there's one thing that we can showcase better, and it's tough to do, is those non-quantifiable benefits your office does. So we see them in this room, and thank you for that, and thank you for the work that you do, and I look forward to the year ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Ford, and I'll make a couple of brief comments as well. Listening to the discussion by my colleagues here and now, I start to think about it being more forward-thinking. And I know we've got an item later in the agenda that talks about the auditor's work plan, and that's where it resonated with me. I'm going to reserve judgment on some of the comments that were made about the culture of the organization, because maybe I'm not in the spot to judge that. But what I can say is councillors may share a lot of the same sense of where there are challenges in the city and in the process. Trying to get things done, you run into quote-unquote bureaucracy or difficulty with something, or it takes a long time. And I think members of the public feel that too from time to time, and when we interact with them. And it's very hard as an individual councillor to do the leadership job that we're supposed to do, which is to challenge the process all the time, to find ways for continuous improvement. We can do that politically, but there's only so many times you can do that before things like council and community councils get out of hand with one-off motions to do all sorts of strange things. But perhaps that's the value in having an Auditor General from an independent standpoint, from a critique of management standpoint, is the auditor, through cooperation with committees such as this, can challenge the process and help to improve things. And I look forward to, one of the comments in the presentation was, there's a few of the things that were captured in the 2018 work, but there's still stuff underway. And so that reminds me that I think it will be an exciting term forward on the committee, as it always is, with things that will come out over time that is being worked on, and all for the betterment of the city. The other thing I wanted to make a special note of was page 19 of the report. I hadn't seen, that I recall, this table in any of the past reports, and the table really speaks to how you see the work of the Auditor General translate into the budget. And I think that's exciting because it makes the savings real. Now, I'll grant that they're probably buried a little bit deeper into budget notes and things, but this is a start of a process, and I think Councillor Nunziata and others would agree that needs to continue to mature. I think that Council's decision-making on finalizing a budget should have consideration to savings and changes to processes that were developed through the audit process. And our reporting structure and just the way that we do things, those numbers are often buried or had been buried in the past. But, $23 million a year is a lot of money, and it makes a big difference on the budget. And when we make those choices, when we have to push those buttons at council, I think that should be on our radar, that there were savings baked into these numbers, that money is being allocated for other things, for more important things. That's a good news story to the public. But it is a dimension that is important, and I would encourage the auditor and the city management to continue to refine and mature that process to get those numbers out in front of council. And frankly, it's not council, it's the public that those numbers are going out to help inform how this budget is put together. With that, I do believe we have I'll stop my time. I do believe we have a motion from Councillor Nunziata. All of those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried. I'll just consult with the clerk. Do we need a motion to, I think it's receive the report? Okay, and so do we require that? So if a member would like to put a motion to receive the report, Councillor Matlow, all of those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Okay, so we are at AU 1.5, the 2018 Annual Report on the Fraud and Waste Hotline. We do have a presentation.
Thank you. And I'd like to welcome Elaine Au, who's the new director of the Fraud and Waste Hotline and Forensic Unit. And I'd also like to welcome Sean McIntosh. He is a senior investigator. Both are new to their roles, and they're going to be carrying the bulk of this presentation because in behind it, they and their team do most of the work. We're going to start with the key statistics, and then we're going to talk about the numbers, but then beyond the numbers of other non-quantifiable benefits. And then we're going to look at the accomplishments and challenges in the forensic unit. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the director.
Thank you, Auditor General, and good morning, members of Audit Committee. So on the first slide, the infographic summarizes the key statistics for the year. 2018 was another busy year for our office. We processed 643 complaints, representing approximately 1,000 allegations. This has remained relatively consistent over the number of complaints received in 2017. Complaint activity may go up or down because of the dynamic nature of the hotline and as a result of various factors, including outreach activities and the nature of issues reported by the media. In terms of what we do with the complaints or the disposition, there are some complaints that are closed right away after we conduct preliminary inquiries, and then there are some complaints that are referred to management to do the first line investigation with oversight from our office. We remain independent in these investigations and ensure complaints are appropriately addressed by management. Then there are other complaints that require our expertise. So determining dispositions is like the process of peeling back the layers of an onion, which you may have heard the Auditor General reference before. Some complaints may only need a first-line review, which peels back the first layer, and then there are other complaints that need a deeper dive to keep peeling back the layers to get to the bottom of things. A good example of this is the raising the alarm investigation. In that case, management conducted their first-line review, and they concluded that there was no support for the allegations. Our office then conducted a deeper dive into the complaint that resulted in the issuance of a public report with many findings and recommendations. This shows that the oversight role our office has is an important one. In the next few slides, we'll take a closer look at the numbers. All 643 complaints received in 2018 were reviewed by our office. We conducted preliminary investigative work on 89% of these complaints. Conducting preliminary investigative work helps us to determine whether allegations have merit for further investigation. In terms of outcomes, 15% of complaints that were investigated or referred to divisions were substantiated as at December 31st, 2018. This percentage will increase as 2018's complaints continue to be concluded in 2019. It is important to note that 26% of the substantiated complaints were anonymous. This shows that even if a complainant wishes to remain anonymous, allegations can still be investigated and substantiated. This slide shows the total losses and recoveries for the last 5 years, as well as actual losses and recoveries for 2018. There are, however, other impacts of the Hotline program beyond the numbers, including the detection and prevention of fraud, which we will go over on the next slide. One of the impacts beyond the numbers is discipline. Discipline acts as a deterrent to wrongdoing, and in 2018, 6 employees had their employment terminated, 4 employees received other discipline such as suspensions, and there were 25 cases of other appropriate action taken by management, including reinforcing workplace expectations through training. This shows that when hotline complaints are received, the city takes action. Another impact is information gathering. Collecting data on complaints is important for several reasons. First, it can help to identify trends in data that may point to systemic issues. In 2018, key trends of substantiated complaints included subsidy fraud, conflict of interest, second jobs, and misuse of city resources. Secondly, complaint data is also one of the factors considered that may result in an audit being conducted. For example, the long-term disability and employee extended health benefit audits from 2015 and 2016 were initiated in part due to complaint data from the hotline. Finally, gathering information also helps us to identify areas that may require proactive monitoring. Other benefits of the hotline include strengthening internal controls and improving operational efficiencies. In terms of accomplishments, the Auditor General continued to focus on conducting major investigations, and during the year, our office issued a report on a fraud investigation of a vendor providing life safety inspection services. The report contains 17 recommendations for management action and has resulted in wide-ranging public safety impacts on the city and on the industry. Another accomplishment in 2018 included the procurement of a new complaint management system. Our office strives to be a leader in terms of how complaints are managed, and when fully implemented, the new complaint management system will help to modernize the tracking and documentation of complaints through their life cycle. One of the challenges this past year was our office's ability to address investigation demands in a timely manner. Under the Toronto Public Service Bylaw, the office must conduct reprisal investigations. It is a challenge to conduct these in a timely manner because of the office's limited capacity, which is also tasked with forensic investigations. In addition, it is not possible to predict the number and complexity of fraud allegations and reprisal complaints received by the hotline. For the city's size and complexity, the hotline team is small. The Auditor General will speak more about this challenge after the presentation. In closing, we would like to take this opportunity to thank management and staff. The symbiotic relationship between our office and management is an important part of the impact and success of the Fraud and Waste Hotline. Management puts in a great effort and takes action to ensure that the right things are done. Only by employees reporting wrongdoing and with management support does the hotline succeed. This concludes the presentation. Thank you for your time, and if there are any questions, we would be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Ford.
Thank you very much. Just one brief question through the chair. So the communications on the fraud and waste hotline, is there any, I know there were some campaigns previously on letting employees know and the public know that this exists. Is that continuing or?
Thank you. And through you, Chair, it is. What we have focused on this year was modernizing. So we have a 24/7 hotline that's just been, it's staffed by people, and that is just happened at the end of the prior year. We are now user testing a new way of bringing complaints and workflow, so we've modernized. Our next step is to go out with our communication plan. With being able to manage volumes, we just wanted to make sure that we had the infrastructure in place to do that. So you're probably going to see that maybe around May, an ongoing campaign, as soon as the system's set up so we can give people the proper way to access our system.
Thank you, Councillor Ford. Are there any other questions? Councillor Fillion.
Do you find that, generally speaking, people are comfortable coming forward, that they, if they have a legitimate concern, that it will be heard? I'm sure it will be by you, but that that there won't be reprisals, or that their anonymity is protected, those sorts of issues. Any impediments to people coming forward?
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I have found that for the most part, for employees who are governed by the disclosure wrongdoing framework in the Toronto Service Bylaw, that they do feel comfortable. My challenge is in the retaliation allegations to be addressing those, because it's kind of a new duty, so we're trying to fold that in. That's the challenging part. So I think that employees feel comfortable. What I am getting is some comments from contractors who work for the city, or I know that Councillor, you were, Vice Chair, you were, in part of raising a complaint with respect to parking authority. And with council, I don't know how members feel. There might be an opportunity to broaden that bylaw to capture other people, including contractors who have a complaint or concerned about raising it. Because somebody has a concern doesn't mean that there's something wrong happening. It just means that they have a concern, they need to have a place to put it, to be dealt with, and they feel comfortable doing that, but they don't feel comfortable if they think there might be retaliation that they raised a complaint. So it might be an opportunity to broaden that.
Okay, maybe that'll be a conversation offline. And to flip that issue around, how often do you get complaints that aren't valid because somebody doesn't like someone, or someone didn't get a contract, or whatever, that you get complaints that are not motivated by an attempt to correct the problem?
We do get those. I know, Elaine, I'll give you a minute to look maybe at the numbers while I respond. We're very careful. We want to make sure that when somebody's making an allegation, that it is a bona fides allegation, that they're not trying to get back at a city staff member. So we're really trying to refine to make sure that if there's continued allegations or they're unfounded, that we find a way to stop that in the process, and we're working with legal services on that. But we do have that happen. But it's not as common where people are targeting people. But we are mindful of that because it has to be a true balance. But for the most part, not every allegation is substantiated. I would say, 15% that we have are substantiated, but those 15% are important. The biggest benefit of the hotline is for somebody to find a place to put their concern, and then they can move on with their day. They know we're going to look at every single item. We're going to get the information we need. We have the authority under the law to get the information we need. So it provides a comfort oversight level, and then they can leave it. That's the biggest benefit of the hotline.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I had a couple. as a counselor and as somebody that's been involved with the Audit Committee for some time, I've had my fair share of people come to me with ideas or concerns, and sometimes they get referred over to the Fraud and Waste Hotline for them to bring their issue forward. One of the common complaints that I hear, though, is just somebody that's gone through a journey of, look, I called this person, I complained to that person, I wrote to that person, nobody seemed to respond to me. And, you know, here I am, and my idea to them is, well, you know, you should really take this to the auditor. One of the things I also learned in the travels was that there isn't always a mechanism to close the loop. So that person might have complained to the right person earlier in the chain, and something might be underway to get it resolved. I wondered if the auditor can comment on how the loop is closed with somebody that calls the Fraud and Waste Hotline. And even if their item is not pursued more, is a reason given, or is there a discussion with the person to say, you know, thanks for bringing this forward, like we really try on this stuff, but in this circumstance, you know, we can't bring it forward, or we found that nothing's wrong, even though we appreciate that you felt that way. It's all about people's confidence in the system, and I just would hate to have the day where somebody said, well, the auditor didn't listen. And I know that that's not necessarily true, but people may have that sense.
I thought a day we wouldn't have individual reports, I wouldn't be getting the tough questions, but you're really giving me these tough questions. So when we deliberately set the system up the way we've set it up, and because when an allegation is made, and if it's an allegation is made against anybody, for example, around this table, because an allegation is made, the fact that we're investigating that is news, and it's almost like it, first of all, it could affect the investigation. The second thing is that it can unfairly judge a person where there is no foundation, you know, maybe rightfully thought to be an allegation, but there's really no basis for that. So we keep it confidential, first of all, to protect the investigation. We respond to every complaint to say, thank you, we receive it, we look at every single one. However, we don't report back to an individual citizen or to an individual councillor or to a mayor the result of a specific investigation. If there are findings, they are brought to this committee first and then reported out publicly that we feel that through this report. So that's how we close the loop in making sure that if there's something that's important to be brought to this table, that we do bring it to the table. Otherwise, I think it's going to be unfair to the people who an allegation may be lodged against, and it will negatively impact an ongoing investigation. An investigation, last point, Chair, if you'd allow me, an investigation is like peeling an onion. It may look okay on the surface. You have to keep digging and digging and digging to the point where you feel comfortable. And so keeping that confidential until you're satisfied that there is or is not something is really important.
Thank you. And my second question is different. I've seen enough of these reports, and I'm often saddened by some of the comments that are put in here in the different cases that come forward. Someone stole something, or there was theft of time and such. What is disheartening, though, is that despite, you know, a high standard of investigation by the auditor, you still see cases where somebody was terminated, and yet there's a fight, there's still a grievance, or there is some sort of continued follow-up action. Maybe my question is to management is there a good appreciation of the process that the auditor goes through in these cases by our bargaining groups and support of the findings, or is there anything we can do to help ensure that these cases go through fairly smoothly? And I appreciate that anyone can grieve something, but I just wondered how it's being reacted to within the labor community, because it's not just simply the employer that has created a case or a termination, but we've got an outside person such as the auditor that has weighed in on the situation. And I don't know, maybe this has to be in camera, but any comment you'd have on that would be appreciated.
Through the chair, I mean, effectively we are talking about labor relations, and in terms of how that gets dealt with through the union leadership, to be honest with you, I don't know if I can answer that question right now. I don't know. I haven't had enough of a history to understand how these circumstances are in fact dealt with by our leadership and involving the union themselves.
Thank you. Perhaps we'll follow up another time with a conversation about it. All right. Anyone wishing to speak to the item? None. I wonder if I could have a motion to recommend that City Council receive this report for information. Councillor Matlow, all of those in favor? Any opposed? That is carried. All right, AU 1.6, Auditor General's Office 2019 Operating Budget. There's a combined presentation for the following item, which is AU 1.7. So we'll hear those together. Auditor General's Office 2019 Work Plan.
Thank you, Chair, and this will be brief. I'm going to, first of all, let you know that we are delivering value. Thank you for your comments this morning. We are lean. We're not asking for more money this year. We are asking to help us to stabilize the staffing level that we have. We asked for 4 of our temporary positions at the most junior professional level to be stabilized. They've been temporary with us for about a year, and it's important that as I look forward to, and I will be moving on within about 2.5 years, others will be retiring, that we're growing the base of our staff. So Ina Chan is my Assistant Auditor General. She's going to lead off the presentation, talking about our value, our challenges, and our priority actions, and then I'll talk about what I'm asking for in this budget, and then we'll have a page or two just on our work plan for this year.
So our annual report presentation highlighted that a natural outcome of the work we do is to identify efficiencies and savings. And the chart on the left highlights the increase in savings in the past years. A major factor influencing the benefits the city is realizing is that management is taking our recommendations seriously and taking action to implement them. The majority of savings realized in 2018 actually come from audits that were issued from 2016 onwards. The financial benefits of our audits and investigations far exceeds the cost to operate our office. As the annual report presentation said, for every $1 invested in our office, the city achieves a return of $11.70.
So these are a couple of the challenges we're facing. When I came to the office a few years ago, there was a number of retirements. And so right now within my office, 70% of the staff are new to their positions, not necessarily new to the office, but new to their positions because we're growing the staff as I'm transitioning through my mandate. The next thing is the other area that we have challenges is in the fraud and reprisal investigations, as I previously mentioned. This is all unpredictable work. For the first time, I think, in a very long time, the last major report before I had done some of these reports was in 2012, a major investigation. Since then, we have done a number within the mandate. When we have a plan for performance audit, you can't be pulling from one side and stopping work to move to another side. It doesn't work well. So we had a small core team, and we've had an addition to our mandate with the reprisal investigations, and we're surviving, but there is a high level of work there, and I'm pitching in, and we're all working together. But that's an area I'm going to watch over the next year. Once we stabilize our office, our functionality of our forensic database, we're going to be looking to see how we can stabilize the processing of major investigations within the unit. So they're the two areas, retaining and developing staff and having sufficient resources for that unit. So on the next slide, there's 3 things that are my priority actions. One is to stabilize the workforce. It's not net new, but it's to permanently have at least 4 of the temporary staff on board. It's to develop a skilled workforce so when, as we transition out, they can pick up the, really we're training the next generation. And the third is to create capacity. Through cross-training, we're doing everything we can to make sure the forensic unit is able to manage the workload. And there are my three challenges. I'm dealing with the last two. The purpose of the budget is to ask for the temporary positions, and the Budget Committee has supported it with the permanently hiring those temporary people who've been there for over a year. So I know, would you like to speak to this?
So the budget is $6.6 million. There is only a $135,000 increase. It's a 2.1% increase, and that's for progression pay for our existing staff and inflationary adjustments for non-payroll items. So there is no new ask, and we're lean, and we're not asking for more. Over 90% of our budget goes to staff salaries and benefits. And in 2018, Council had approved 36 positions, 32 of which are permanent and 4 which are temporary. So the budget includes a request to convert 4 existing council-approved temporary positions to permanent positions. There's no net dollar impact in 2019 for that request, and it would only be a $400,000 difference, and that's only if the time-limited funding was rescinded.
Yes. And the three major areas we're going to be spending that money this year is to, if you want to flip up the slide, we provided a list. We'll go over it in more detail, but we have a list of projects that are going to be ongoing and coming up. If you want to go back, Ina. The second area is we're going to be conducting our full risk assessment again. When we start our work, we go and identify the biggest area where we can have the most value, and that is through the risk assessment, and the value relates to the operations of the city, not policy decisions. That's Council's bailiwick. And then the third area is in, as I said, in the in-depth forensic investigations, really trying to make sure we are able to meet our obligations in that area. And there are the three areas. One of the areas where we have been unable to do a risk assessment is the police. We have requested it in the past. The last project was conducted around 2011. We've requested to do a risk assessment of their operations. We have not received, that was in 2014, 2015 when I started. They have asked us to do 2 projects. One was related to carding, one was related to searches, police searches. Both of those already have other independent investigations and reviews happening from outside parties. So I'm not going to be adding more value until that work is done. So there might be an opportunity there to be invited in for a risk assessment. We will make a formal request. Toronto Public Library has invited us in. Initially they didn't, but they have invited us in. We're going to include that in our risk assessment this year. So the risk assessment process is a major undertaking. We go across all units, all corporations and agencies, and we identify the high priority items that we need to look at. So including those in there would be, I think, a good positive return for the city. And the last are the projects. You want to highlight some of the projects, Ina?
So I think the projects are they're described in the report, and so they cover a variety of areas. There's 2 sets of tables in the report. One highlights the current projects that are underway as well as upcoming this year, and then we've also tried to give a horizon for projects that we expect to start either in 2019 or early 2020 based on our capacity.
So in the divisions, social housing, it's an important area. Social housing, the wait list, we're looking at emergency shelter operations. Urban forestry is in another phase right now. Engineering construction, big area. Fleet services, that's ongoing right now. IT services, there's projects scheduled there. Agencies and corporations, TTC revenue, we're doing a second phase which focuses around the equipment. And also we're looking at TCHC revitalizations. That project is almost done. And we're going to be doing a big Treasury audit, and this relates to accounts that have monies that are there for a long period of time and really getting in behind that a bit more. and city divisions on the horizon. We do have city planning, revenue services, so we have a lot on the go. And we will be, what we do in our risk assessment process is we meet with all the councillors, we meet with all the city divisions, we look at our fraud and waste hotline, and we identify the most appropriate projects for the following year. So next year we'll have a fresh new set of projects to look at. And that's it. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Fillion.
Just a question on what causes something to make it into the work plan? Do you have far more, I think I know the answer, but far more work than you can fit in? If council makes a resolution, does that make it on the list, or is that just part of the larger number of projects you need to consider?
So thank you for the question. Through you, Chair. I'll start with the second question first. If council has a request to go for something to go on my plan, it provides the request, and I will assess the priority within the other projects that are happening, and also the budget and timing and the readiness of the organization to be ready to be able to be audited. There's sometimes a stage that they have to be at. They can make a request. Council can also direct me to do a project with a 2/3 vote. So there's projects that you can request and projects that you can direct. So once I get a 2/3 vote, I will need to put that on my plan.
So I'll just give an example, because I'm guessing it doesn't fit into the 2/3 vote category, but just so I'll understand it. There was a resolution regarding the transportation department and the collection of fees. So I think it wasn't directly in relation to your work plan. Like, it wasn't when your work plan was an agenda item. It was when something else was an agenda item. So does that just then go into the big pot of things that you couldn't possibly get to all of them right away?
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Chair, that's a fantastic example. So through the year, we have information that comes in around possible opportunities. We assess that with other things. And so this year we have a project that's going to look at multiple revenue streams, including the one that you've just pointed out, and also including the new municipal tax for hotels, to look at, right from the beginning, making sure things are set up properly. So that project is included in our plan, and it's included on page...
So it's in Table 2, Item 7, City Revenue Streams. The Auditor General has done a series of audits on revenue streams and will continue to look at new revenue streams, as well as Council's requested review of permit application fees for construction hoarding, which I think is the one that you mentioned.
Okay, great, thank you. And turning to, I guess, public health and police, and I'm more interested in police because it is such a large budget. Who would it be who would invite you in? Would it be the chief of police, or would it be the board?
Thank you, Chair. It is the board.
And so I'm just trying to familiarize myself with the process. So you would advise the board formally or informally, I'm not sure which, that you are available to do an audit, that you would like to do an audit, and then you either hear silence back or you get a thank you very much but no thanks back in writing. How does it work?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I can say that from the beginning, Councillor Matlow actually made motions back in 2015 to allow me to go in to do a risk assessment with police. City Council has supported that. But to answer your question, I have to be invited in by the board. And I have made ourselves available to conduct a risk assessment. And through that assessment, what happens is we identify projects that we think are important to audit, where there's an opportunity for improvements, potentially, based on a number of factors. It could be risk to the public, it could be savings, it could be IT risk, it could be a number of things. So we identify through the parameters that other Auditor General's offices do when they're looking at an organization, what they think that is high risk, and we have to be invited in by the board. I understand the board did do a review recently, a task force review, but part of the work we would do would be starting to see how much of that has been implemented. That would be like an interesting starting point. So to answer your question, we have to be invited in by the board.
And do you offer your services formally, like in writing, and do they get back to you formally, or is it all just a conversation?
I have, thank you, and I have, so through you, Chair, I have offered our services for risk assessment in writing, and we were asked to, I did a presentation at the board about the importance of that, and we were asked to do 2 projects, those projects related to reviews that were ongoing by other groups. And so we will continue to ask, so I'll send another letter and continue to make a request to the chair of the board.
And I think I have a question, I don't know if it's, I have a question of you, Mr. Chair, on this subject, but I don't know how to ask it or where and when to ask.
Perhaps after the meeting?
Okay.
Councillor Nunziata, you're next on the line.
Yeah, and just on the point of the Police Services Board, we did an audit in 2014, because I was on the board at that time as well, as you remember.
Thank you.
And recommendations were brought forward.
Paid duty?
Pardon?
Paid duty? A paid duty, is that the?
I remember, well, I was on the board, that was in 2014, and there was a report that was brought forward to the board, and all the recommendations were adopted. I don't recall exactly what audit that was, but I know that you did do an audit.
I'll have to go back and check. I might
Yeah,
mistake
yeah.
the date, yes.
Maybe it wasn't, maybe it was it before you started? I don't know.
Actually, Jane.
Maybe it was before you started.
Jane, you conducted, I think, the last.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the last major audit we did for the Toronto Police Services Board is the pay duty audit. But prior to that, Councillor, you may be remembering the sexual assault investigation
Yes.
audit. And
Yes.
that was fully implemented, all the
Right.
recommendations.
And so
Yes.
the board has invited, maybe another request, and because I'm on the board, and so is Councillor Ford.
Oh.
Yeah, so that makes, so just a couple questions. First of all, in your work plan, agencies and corporations, so TTC, Phase 1, fair inspection and fair evasion. Now, as you know, to the auditor, for the past 2 years that I have brought that up during the budget process on concerns that I had with the revenue loss to TTC on fares. And I brought it up in 2018, and then I brought it up again this year. So can you tell me who triggered this report? Was it through the budget question, or who triggered that?
Thank you, Councillor. I do remember you asking
Yeah.
TTC.
2 years ago.
Yeah. Actually, we started to do reviews of the major operational areas, procurement being one, revenue operations is another area. We did some expenses review. So we're just trying to cover up the major areas, and certainly there's been some work done in this area by TTC, so like with the mal test study and that kind of thing.
Because I do know my question to TTC during the budget last year and this year, when I questioned that, is that they informed me, they couldn't answer my question, and they informed me that there was an audit being done. All right. So we're also asking questions on number 7 too?
Yes.
Okay. So on number 7, page 7 of 11, transportation services, winter maintenance. So is that review being done at the request that was brought forward by the mayor?
No, that's been
Okay.
on our plan for a little bit, and we're looking at things that are different than the mayor. We're looking at contractual matters, how contracts are awarded. We're looking at our compliance with what's in the contract, how they're setting fees. So we haven't done our scoping yet, but that's kind of the area. I think there's other areas that the mayor has, I've just seen in the press, and I don't know how many of those will be encompassed, but between me and the ombudsman, if the ombudsman's doing work, we're going to just coordinate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Matlow.
In the plan that I see here, aside from ad hoc directions that council might give with a 2/3 vote to add on to your work plan, are all the different areas that you intend to audit laid out in front of us today?
From the perspective of the performance audits, correct, and the forensic audits come up, and we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know when they're going to come in the door. So there's unplanned work. This is the planned work.
Yeah, so I wanted to explore sort of the unplanned work. Like, is it your intent, or do you think it's clear to the many divisions and agencies that while you have a specific work plan that's itemized with, heads up, we're going to look into you, that there may be a reason where you just decide to go in and investigate and audit a division because information is provided to you that provides you a sense of urgency that you need to go in and do that? And do you have that ability, and do you believe that there's a cognizance out there that can happen?
Well, thank you. Through you, Chair. The municipal code requires that I provide the plan, my work plan for performance audits to this committee. And then when there is, it also outlines when there's an allegation of fraud where I'm going to go into a certain area, that I notify the city manager, and their teams do a lot of work around a lot of the fraud matters with us in concert. So they know that's going on. To your point about the unplanned work, we don't go in to do that, like fish, I would call it fishing. And having planned work is not a bad thing, because if people look at the plan, they know what we're coming. It's okay. Your benefit to city council is the same, where they may want to tighten up some areas or do something. So I don't mind that we planned this part of the work. And if there's an allegation where we don't provide notice, it's because it's a forensic matter.
And in no way do I mean to suggest by my line of questioning that it isn't important to have a plan. I would expect you to have a plan, and I'd want to know what that plan is, and then we can hold you to account as far as your performance. There's an analogy. I'm going to use sort of an extreme example, but sort of how like drug testing is often done in corporations or in other groups where. Part of the strategy of not letting everyone know who's going to be next is to create a culture of deliberately of that unpredictability, so that you never know if you're going to be the next one, and therefore there may be some self-discipline provided for some, just because that's who they are and they act ethically and that's how they behave, but others because they're worried about maybe getting caught. And I just wonder, is there any wisdom, in your opinion, about leaving some room in the work plan, even just to leave a suggestion, that there may be space for those sort of as needed kind of basis type of audits to send a signal that. Well, yeah. Just to kind of send a signal that yes, you have a plan. You plan to see that. Plan through to fruition, but just that heads up, you may not always get the heads up. Well,
it's a challenging question. The first thing would have to happen would.
I'm losing time with you, by the way. I don't mean to. Yeah.
No. It's good, because it just gives me time to reflect on why we do it a certain way and the opportunity. One of the things that would have to happen would be a change to the municipal code, which requires that I bring everything that I'm going to do forward. So that would have to happen. I guess there is, it could be that you might catch, for for unplanned work, somebody out. I tend to try to stay away from a got you mentality and let people know this is what we're looking at, this is why. And I find that there's good cooperation that way, and it's fine. Is there a benefit? Well, you might find some people who might tighten up in an earlier way. That could happen, but it works okay this way also. So either way, whatever this committee would like, I would.
By the way, it's not so much about what this committee would like. I really am just curious about your opinion as far as like is there any value in that? And if you haven't really considered that, we can continue that conversation offline. But I just wonder about that.
The value I find is in the forensic matters, where we don't broadcast what we're doing because of to protect the investigation. The audits, performance audits, I focus on continuous improvement. And I think that I'm comfortable with the way they're working, but on the forensic side, that's where I need to have the confidentiality, because that's where we need to understand exactly what's happening.
Thank you.
Okay.
Microphone. Any further questions? I know it's a double item, so we could do a second round if I think everyone's good. I'll ask just a follow-on question to Councillor Matlow. I guess in theory, council could have a 2/3 vote to suggest something added to your audit plan, and I guess in theory we could suggest a wild card audit. But from a practical standpoint, would another audit fall off the chart if we did something like that?
Thank you. Chair, that's exactly why they require a 2/3 vote, because technically you could make a request around certain areas and then the priorities as we see it from an independent perspective would fall off. So the answer is yes, but there's a way to get around that. If there's a special audit required that you're directing work to happen and something has to fall off, council can add money or be comfortable with what's falling off. So there's ways we can manage the falling off part, but the reason for that provision across all Auditor General's offices is to make sure that it has to be a really important matter and that it doesn't affect an independent work plan.
Okay, so we couldn't say, we're going to give you a wild card audit. Further to Councillor Matlow's theoretical discussion about a surprise element, go and do another audit, don't tell anybody what it is. We couldn't do that. We'd have to be a little bit more specific as a council body.
You would be, or you could say I could pick it, and I would do that, but something would fall off the plate.
Right, and for you to pick it, you would follow a methodology that we talked about before at this committee. It's just you've got your risk assessments and what you've got on your list, and including a list that's too long to deliver on right in this report, right? You've got some at the end. Okay, thank you very much. Is anyone wishing to speak on the item? Councillor Matlow.
I'll only speak just to clarify, just due to the chair's comments, just to clarify sort of my intentions about my line of questioning. In no way, like when I was asking those questions, just to clarify, in no way do I mean to suggest that there should be, as you said, like wild card or investigations and then have something else drop off. My question was really, and it was really a very, very sincere question, just should there be room within a clear work plan to have sort of, 1 to 9 be specific agencies or divisions, and then 10 be sort of like to their discretion. Part of a clear funded plan moving forward to provide some deliberate lack of predictability to the system as a whole, that they should be providing as much self-discipline as possible, constantly checking in with themselves to make sure that their systems are as solid as possible, that they are being as responsible and thoughtful with every tax dollar as we expect them to be. But I just want to make it clear that in no way am I suggesting that there be anything less than a very clear and disciplined plan that the Auditor General can execute. By asking those questions, though, I'm not suggesting that I know the answer to it either, and that's why I really did want to understand if the Auditor General saw value in that suggestion or not, and I will take her advice on that. I'll conclude by saying that I think that her, what she has demonstrated over the years has been that they've been selecting, I think, some really important areas to look at. And I'm not, in no way am I suggesting that I don't have a lot of confidence in how they've arrived at the work plans that they've proposed. So therefore, I'm going to support this.
Nope. Then I'll only speak just to move the two recommendations. The first being that we support the Auditor General's ask to normalize her staff, her budget submission, and the second would be to recommend that Council receive report, I think it's number 1.7, the Auditor General's work plan. And just with the brief comment that I'm more than pleased to support the Auditor's ask for resources. As we talked about earlier this meeting, the Auditor brings back tremendous value, both in dollars and in public confidence in the government. And if I thought I could get away with it, I would send more resources. But we've got the ask of the Auditor, and we're going to support, hopefully with this vote, what she has asked for. And so with that, all those in favor of the recommendations? Any opposed? That's carried. And on the second item, 1.7, all of those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. AU 1.8, Auditor General's 2018, AU 1.9. Auditor General's 2018 Consolidated Status Report on follow-up of outstanding audit recommendations. Councillor Fillon, you had held the item.
Yes, and most of the...
Do you have is it questions or...
yeah, just one. I think most of what I was thinking of is we've already covered one way or another. My only remaining question here is there any commonality, is there any category that these tend to fall into that people either don't do at all or take a very long time getting to? Is it just because they're complicated and take a while to do, or is there some, general reluctance to do certain things?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. You have a balance of both, and we've talked today about also recognizing groups that are implementing quicker as much as they can, and we've highlighted in a prior report, the report which is the point 8, which talks about, for example, revenue services. They've completed 13 of 15 recommendations, and they're really pushing hard on that. We do have some challenges with some areas which have more recommendations, and some have been open for a longer time. We highlighted that also on page 9 and 11. I think maybe facilities management, some of them have been open for a while, and also IT, they've been open for a while, and so those would be questions for management. So what we've done is we've highlighted on, if you go back to tab 8, we've highlighted some that are not fully implemented, which would be on page 5 of 11. And there can be reasons for that. Sometimes IT systems and security take a long time, but not all. So they would be specific questions based on the feedback provided by management for you, the basis to ask any division. But Revenue Services is doing a good job. A lot of the, as a general rule, I can say that the city, in my view, is implementing much, I think probably one of the best groups compared to audit offices results that I've seen since my 30-year career. They do take things to heart. They do implement. Council has provided a focus on that. You're asking me questions, that works. So they are doing a great job. We have 89% implementation rate since the beginning of us tracking our recommendations. But there's opportunity, I think, some in the parks area, some in the facilities area, maybe the IT area, where there's going to continue to be a concerted effort. It's not to call anybody out, it's just that they're big areas and they're big recommendations. So, but we always highlight the good news and the opportunities to move things along in our reports.
That's great, and when we have 89% good news, I'm hesitant to focus on 11. However, and maybe I wasn't sure whether to hold 8 or 9. Maybe I should have held them both, because it was more of a general question that could lead to something specific. But it's great, all the information we have here. I wasn't able to take from this kind of here's like, people aren't, generally speaking, everybody's being highly cooperative, but there's these 3 instances where we really aren't getting cooperation, and perhaps we need to take further action. I don't know if perhaps we were supposed to pick that out, or are we not supposed to? Are there some things in here where you would appreciate it if we were to make a motion or suggest further action, or is that something we don't need to do? You're giving us the information and you're on top of it.
Through you, Chair, can I draw your attention to point 8 of the, item 8, and it's on page 9 of 11. And one example where we do pull out an opportunity would be, for example, the long-term outstanding recommendations section. And we can probably do a better job of highlighting that, and maybe in a future report, which will help you. But, for example, the disaster recovery planning for the city computer facilities, it's a recommendation that's been outstanding since 2008. Those are the kinds of things that when we become concerned, we'll highlight it in a section and bring it to the committee. But we can probably do that in a more verbal way. Go forward.
And partly because it's my first meeting as a member of the committee, if something's from 2008, I don't know whether it's, that's terrible, it's 11 years old, let's get on their case, or by now it's become, not as important, or, it's hard for me to make that kind of judgment to zero in on something. And to me, it would be helpful, if it's appropriate, if you do want us to spot these, if there was kind of a separate section that said, we're really not getting the results we expect on these, small percentage of items, and we really need to draw these to your attention, and maybe some kind of further action or nudging is required.
I just want to finalize my question. So we'll do a better job at making sure we highlight those to you. Again, I'm going to, for example, refer to page 10 of 11 of that report, which is in tab 8. And for example, we talked about the maintenance and admin controls in facilities and real estate. And in 2005, there's 32 recommendations. And some of those recommendations include completing an implementation plan for maintenance standards for facilities, making sure that we have a plan for each city building, making sure that we have a timely completion of a capital approved projects, making sure that there's funding, so there's some broad recommendations there that should be moved along, understanding there's lots of moving parts within the, management of buildings. We try to do it here, but to your point, perhaps we can do a better job and work with the city management and the team to see if we can.
But is there a role for the committee here? Like, should we, for example, be putting these back on the agenda for next meeting so that we can have a discussion about which ones should be highlighted and that we should perhaps be making a motion on? Or is that kind of overstepping our bounds and we should just leave it with you? I'm just not clear.
Thank you. That's exactly your role, is the accountability role. My role is simply to identify items that really start to either get old or maybe need attention. And I put it within the report, and we try to highlight it with questions or a presentation. It's your role to ask the questions. We also provide a lot of detail, which is a lot of detail to go through, but in the area where there's older recommendations that haven't been implemented, I'm happy to bring those back with the cooperation of management to have a dual presentation on what the recommendation is and what the result is. I can say, if it's still on the list, it's relevant. If it's taken off the list because a business has changed, we will note it's taken off the list, but if it's in the report, it's still relevant.
So just going to do a time check on the questions. Is there a desire for an extension or a continued round? Because I'll do a follow-on question to that.
Yeah, I'm just looking for a way to deal with this, yeah.
Okay, and so I'll ask the question of the auditor. In reading this report, I would admit some of the thinking along the lines of Councillor Fillion in trying to digest it, and perhaps the piece that would help me understand the report better or digest it better is to look at the shift from the last comment from management to the shift of the comment in the current report. And for instance, there was one, I think, about, it was either facility or cleaning contracts that basically says, well, it's going to be implemented in 2018, 2019. I'm just taking a generic example. Perhaps I would be more alarmed if it said last year that it would be implemented in 2017, and yet it's not. So maybe my question to you is there a way to zoom in on those deltas where things slip year over year in the format of this report? I don't know if it's an extra column to say this is what the response was last year and this is what the response is this year. And do you think that would help the committee zoom in on those items that are taking a long time to implement for whatever practical reason versus the ones that seem to be slipping, and we should be making a decision as a committee as to whether or not we should show additional concern?
Thank you, and I'm looking at Angela Raflavovich. It gives me an opportunity to thank her for assembling this report, and she's nodding her head yes. And we can certainly provide a reconciliation between what was the time requested in the original recommendation, what happened last year, what happened this year. And if we highlighted to say, is that reasonable from our perspective, that'll provide you with the information that you can then discuss with management, and we'll share all of that with management so that things continue to be moved on in an open fashion.
And so to follow up on that, I'm not suggesting that we direct you to do that report but maybe through our questions we're suggesting a way to deal with it. This does go on to council, so maybe there is an opportunity to take another question on some of these items. And maybe that's today we can forward it to council. But if there's additional work between now and council, maybe there's an opportunity to zoom in on some of these. Would that be a reasonable process, Madam Auditor?
To complete that report before council?
No, but for in the future, for you to consider a way to articulate these items better in the report, show the change from one column, from one year to the next.
Sure, we can do that, but I think, also management is engaged on these items, and so it might be also that that they work with, filling that out. I know the CFO couldn't be here today, and she was definitely engaged to try to provide that kind of information to address these matters. So between our group and management's group, we'll get the information. It's a reasonable request.
Maybe one more question. That when you're providing the recommendations and reports going forward, is there a way to establish a deadline where it becomes a red flag that if it's crossed? And I recognize that management will often respond to suggestions of the auditor with a time frame, but is there a way for the auditor to offer a counter comment back about your assessment as to what a reasonable time frame would be, because you've just spent time investigating the issue and would have a fairly good understanding to provide an independent view of how long it should take to implement a change?
Thank you. And Chair, management does provide the quarter within which they're going to do the work. When the report comes forward, that's a great time to have that discussion. So if you wanted to know, is that a reasonable time frame? If you had a question, I can provide my opinion. The city manager can provide his opinion and the constraints that he's working under. So that will be something that you can discuss for each report. We can track that. It might also be appropriate to track how management ranks the findings, the recommendations as 1, 2, or 3 in priority, so that you can at least address the priority ones, because sometimes there's 185 this year, so there's a lot. And it's worthwhile to also, I think, rank those in priority, and the city manager can assist with making sure that his priorities are addressed.
Okay, that's the end of my questions. We'll go to speak. Is there a desire for did you want to place a motion, Councillor Fillion? Do we need to stand this down? I'm sorry, Councillor Nunziata.
It's actually a fast question. So under revenue services, the The outstanding. Part of that, is that tax collection revenue?
Yes, it is actually, yeah.
Because I think I brought that up a few years ago, the lack of collection,
Yes.
the outstanding collection.
That, also assessing properties, reassessing properties, making sure that the properties have the proper tax assessment on them, finding properties that weren't on the tax roll, that kind of thing, so I think.
So, do you know what the total revenue that we haven't been collecting in taxes for 2018?
I don't have that here, I'll have to take that away.
How many millions of dollars is it?
Take that away.
Okay, well, you don't have to give me the answer now, but I'm just curious. Okay, thanks.
We're jumping on the recommendations, though, for sure.
Were there any other questions on this item? With the consent of the committee, I'd like to stand it down. I believe Councillor Fillion had a motion that's just going to take a moment to prepare. And the proposal would be is we just go to the next item. I had some questions on it. I don't think it'll take long, but that may give us a couple of minutes to deal with this. If that's okay with the committee?
Motion will be ready in a minute.
Great. Okay, so we'll stand down the current item and we'll go to that's item 1.9 is the current item. We're going to go to AU 1.12, the City of Toronto Audit Plan for the year ending December 31st, 2018. I'll ask if there are any committee members that have a question about this item. Seeing none, I'll ask a couple of my own. Yes, we'll just stand down item 1.9 for a moment. So I guess my question through you, Madam Auditor, and or through to a representative from PwC, which we've got here, great. There's been a change in the materiality threshold, and I see that it has gone to 2%, and that's a significant dollar change. It's from 184 million to 259 million. Should the Audit Committee be aware or concerned with this? It's a fairly large dollar amount. Are we offering a lesser degree of protection in the audit services to the people of Toronto? And what comment do you have on that?
So the materiality has increased from 1.5% to 2% this year. We've noted in the plan that under Canadian auditing standards, was the audit guidelines that we follow as external auditors, we're allowed as auditors to go all the way up to 3% of a benchmark such as total expenditures or total revenues. So to address your question, Mr. Chair, the increase in materiality does not have a significant impact to the nature, extent, and timing of the testing that we do. I think I've made comments to this committee in the past that we execute our audit testing to levels much below that threshold. That threshold has been set for reporting purposes and for purposes of notifying this committee and others that should there be unadjusted items in the accounts that exceed that amount, that would be a quantitative benchmark for something that would be viewed as material to those financial statements taken as a whole. Again, that's in the context of a City of Toronto, $12+ billion annual budget in terms of expenditures. But in short, again, or just to re-summarize, the nature, extent, and timing of the day-to-day and what we do, there's not a significant change as a result of the change in materiality.
Okay.
Sorry, could I just add one thing? I've also conferred with other public sector bodies who do the similar work, and the move to 2% is consistent with those bodies also. So other provinces, for example, of an equal size.
Okay. Second question, Appendix B Audit Service Guideline. That's the paper that came to us today on yellow. Do I take it to understand that the additional audit services are things that are in the right-hand column? These are kind of things that are at risk of being outside of the scope of your proposal here, that they could trigger more work. And I guess my question to you is how likely are these based on your work with the city in the past? So, one of them that jumps out, we talked about it today, significant delays in receiving requested information that results in idle staff time or staffing changes. We just put a motion through the committee on another report on that. Is that a problem, and is that going to generate costs to us that are outside of what's being contemplated here?
So the first part of the question, Mr. Chair, you are correct in that right column identifies areas that would be out of scope or additional to the fixed fee amount as we've agreed upon as part of the RFP. Over our 8-year tenure, those additional amounts have occurred from time to time. They typically do not fall in that first category. They typically would follow in the other 2 or 3 categories. You know, a good example where additional fees would result would be is if there's a significant change in processes as a result of a system change. That would be an area that would be different than what was originally contemplated as part of the audit years back and would warrant additional audit effort. Another example, Mr. Chair, if I could add, would be if there was a change in accounting principles. So a new accounting pronouncement came out. If I think back a couple years ago, there's been some new accounting pronouncements out in revenue, some new accounting pronouncements out in contaminated sites. Those are areas where, as a result of that, that required additional audit effort for us to complete the audit on the consolidated accounts. And those were agreed upon in advance with management. We agreed on the scope of the work, the nature, extent, and timing of the work, and ultimately, a lot of times those amounts were finalized post the audit committee meeting when we would agree on that final amount before final billing.
Okay, and then I guess my last question here, because of time, is just on the consolidation process. So you do audit of journals and audit of the system that we've got at the city, which is the accounting system. You do things like test unusual journal entries. I'm just picking a line out of here. And then you look at the consolidation process. And somewhere in here it talks about it being in an Excel spreadsheet. So have I got it right that we've got these accounting systems, but at the very, very high level, there's more of a manual process where the numbers are brought together into the consolidated statements, and you're going to go and audit that, but I'm assuming that there's some financial judgment used in how those numbers are assembled for the consolidated statement. So when you're auditing, you're going through the rules and the processes of all those financial systems, but then at the very top, those are fairly significant judgment calls done by our staff. How do you audit such a call without kind of working through an enormous body of work to sort of reprove the financial systems? That you get, best way to describe it is, is how do you audit those business decisions, and how can you do that within the framework that you've got here?
So the summary, Mr. Chair, is correct in terms of there's a system or systems in place that roll up, and then on top of that, there's a consolidation that takes place. If you can appreciate, every agency-related entity, which is over 100 that form the consolidated accounts, they're all outside the city's computer system here. And so those amounts all get captured via this Excel spreadsheet consolidation model that management's put together. So from an audit perspective, we do testing of those entities that come into the consolidated accounts and make sure they agree back to source records. And then there's adjustments to that set of consolidated accounts. Now, from an audit perspective, we would be testing those adjustments on a risk basis based on the magnitude of those adjustments, agreeing back to source documentation, understanding the reason for the adjustment and the validity of that adjustment, and that provides us collectively overall comfort on the consolidated accounts.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions on this item? None? May I request that a member move receipt? Councillor Nunziata, you got your hand up first. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. So we will go back to AU 1.9, and there's also a request to reopen. The clerk is advising on AU 1.8 and AU 1.10. And I believe Councillor Fillion is going to move the same motion for all three of those. So is there any objection, or may I see all those in favor of reopening AU 1.8? Any opposed? That's carried. Reopening of AU 1.10. Any opposed? That's carried. Okay, so we now have, we're going to go back to AU 1.8, 1.9, and 1.10, which we'll deal with together. Councillor Fillion, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Just one simple motion, just in light of what we were discussing before. I don't think it needs any further explanation, that the Audit Committee requests the Auditor General to report to the Audit Committee for its meeting on May 3rd, 2019, the outstanding audit recommendations which are of greatest concern, just so we have those highlighted for us, and then we can decide if we need to do anything further with any of them.
Okay, anyone else wishing to speak? Seeing none, the clerk's advised that I should take 3 votes on these. So on AU 1.8, the motion by Councillor Fillion. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. On AU 1.9, on the motion from Councillor Fillion, all those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. AU 1.10, all those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Madam Clerk, do I have any other? That's it. Otherwise, thank you very much. Those were the last items, and therefore, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.